what? It's still related to Collector's Corner, so let's talk about this big news in terms of grading. Let's talk about this big news because we actually alluded a little bit to some of this stuff that's been going on a previous episode. We've been talking about the fact that maybe it would be nice to talk about video games a little bit, and particularly collecting video games, that aspect of video games and why people get them. So a lot of people might have heard about what's recently been happening with Wata in terms of some of these amazing prices they've been getting at auctions. Very controversial, actually. But this is from actionnetwork.com. I want to give a shout out to Reserved Investments because Reserved Investments has been talking about this story quite a bit. And this is actually where I found the article. So thank you, Reserved Investments, for being on like the cutting edge of this story. So this is from actionnetwork.com. It's the headline reads, PSA grading parent buys video game grader Wata. So Collectors Universe continued its buying spree, announcing Wednesday morning, by the way, this is dated July 14th, so it is a little bit dated, that it had bought video game grader Wata Games. The acquisition comes 2 weeks after the parent company of PSA, the industry leader in grading cards and autographs, finalized a deal to bring Golden Auctions under its umbrella. Terms were not disclosed. The company will move from its Denver offices into PSA's headquarters in California, but will keep its name and branding. Pretty interesting there. The bet on Wata comes at a time when Collectors Universe is hoping to get a jump on building up its business and grading other forms of collectibles. Wata was founded in 2017 by 25-year-old Dents Khan, who started collecting old video games and noticed the need for a company to grade the cartridges, boxes, and seals in the event they were never opened. In 2018, Wata was grading a handful of games. Not only does Wata bet on the nostalgia of kids who play particular Atari and Nintendo games, who are now 35 to 50, but the adoption of video game collecting as an asset class took flight thanks to its impressive thick cases that securely allow a collector to display the game standing up on a desk. Says the business has gotten more sophisticated in the fall of 2019 when Ryan Sabga, whose company Canyon Drive built the cases, signed on as a CEO. The company has never released financials nor population reports. Very important. So they have never released financials or population reports. But from eBay auctions alone, it's apparent that the company has graded thousands and thousands of games. So the big thing, of course, was in July of last year, a Super Mario Brothers game sealed and graded at a 9.4 on a 10-point scale, sold at Heritage for $114,000. In April of this year, a Super Mario Brothers game sold for $660,000. And last week, a Super Mario Brothers game sold for $1.56 million. It says, as the category grew, Heritage moved video game sales from the back pages of its comic book auctions to its own separate sales. You can read the rest of the article again over on Action Network. So I'm curious, Dave, we have touched a little bit on this phenomenon of Wata games and some of these ridiculous prices they've gotten. But what do you think about the fact that PSA decided to buy them out?
Well, it makes sense. I mean, PSA is obviously in the business of, grading and selling. You know what I mean? So it makes sense that this is and this is a market. I had an interesting conversation with a coworker of mine. We were talking about video games, and he's like a big video game guy. And I was mentioning to him a documentary I saw on Amazon Prime. I didn't watch it; it was on while I was working. And on that, Grant Morrison was talking about how the video games, to an extent might be the continuation of the comic book story. Like maybe comic books become more and more niche and they're only sold by little boutique shops. And, why would you read about Batman when you could be Batman, right? That kind of idea. And so it makes sense to me that PSA would want to get into this. My only slight confusion is that isn't PSA, shouldn't they get their card grading in order first?
Yeah, that's a great point. That actually is a great point. The fact that it seems like PSA is already having, problems as it is, and as far as just accommodating the customer base and people that want things graded. But this has been in the works for a while. My understanding was a lot of people thought PSA was just going to start grading games, but they were just going to start doing that. They were going to start a game grading division, okay? And so some people, including reserved investments, were a little taken aback that they went this route and decided to purchase Wata because of the controversy that Wata doesn't provide population reports. A lot of people are very concerned about these prices that these auctions have been getting, okay? And I would say be very concerned. Be very, very concerned. If you do not want to get ripped off, be very, very concerned about what these prices are. Ronnie has a great comment, very relevant. He said, "Drugs are bad, okay? That's my opinion on those Mario games selling." Ronnie, you've hit the nail right on the head. I mean, it's very, very concerning in my mind about these prices, and it makes me concerned because PSA has that very good reputation, right? In fact, I almost feel like they have too good a reputation because there are other grading options out there, and it feels like people are neglecting them because everybody wants PSA. It's got to be graded by PSA. We can't use anybody else. PSA is not even grading stuff, but we have to wait. We can't use somebody else, even though they're not grading stuff right now. It's very frustrating, and I don't know. I don't know if this is really a very, very, very good move. I think it's a good move on PSA's part in terms of obviously Wata has had some amazing success, but I'm not sure honestly how I feel about grading games to begin with. I really don't. I mean, it's a different animal to me than when it comes to cards and comics, and some of those other things, even autographs. Grading a game that's in a hard case, and then trying to determine the quality of the seal if it's never been opened. If it's never been opened, I'm kind of sitting there like, what's the point? A lot of people talk about that with grading action figures too. A lot of people do not like the idea of grading action figures, and it doesn't seem like action figures have taken off the way that any of these other asset classes have, or I should say these collectibles have. I won't necessarily call them asset classes because unless we're talking about like the first appearance of Superman or Batman or stuff like that or Spider-Man, those might be actual asset classes at this point. I might concede that, but most of this stuff, it's just not. It's just not at that level. It's still very speculative. There's a lot of shenanigans going on with this stuff. I'm going to put it that way. I think there's a lot of shenanigans when it comes to this stuff. But the one thing I hope is that they'll start at least putting population reports out there. That would be nice. It'd be nice if they started putting population reports out there.
And for me, I think the big difference too, like, I talked on a previous episode about, some of the comics I'm looking to get graded, and the ones I do have graded, I've been replacing those by buying, trade paperbacks and essentials so that I'm still able to access the story and the materials and whatever, whenever I want. And then in my mind anyway, for those that I either are that important to me personally, or I think are valuable that I want to, kind of secure their value to an extent. Getting a comic CGC graded is a good way to kind of, guarantee a little bit better price when you go to sell it, right? At least that's the general consensus of the general belief. Yeah. In theory, there you go. That's a good way to put it. In theory. So that's how I've been looking at it. And then the thing that's nice about, when you get a card, graded, you can still see the front and the back of the card, on the slab. So it's not like you're, you can still experience the card because you're going to look at the image and read the information on the back, right? The comic's a little bit more difficult because you can't get to it. But when you encapsulate a game, you can't play it anymore, right?
Exactly. Exactly. It's like trading cards. I think you hit the nail on the head, because you're not really losing any of the intrinsic value of what a trading card is by getting it graded if it's in a proper case that you can see both sides of the card. You're not really losing anything. Actually, what you're doing is preserving it, right? You're actually preserving the card. So I can totally understand that. When it gets into comics, you are a step removed because you can't open the book and read it. But then again, if the book is going to fall apart, right? If it's on that old newsprint paper and all that kind of stuff, and it's going to fall apart anyway, there is some sense to putting it, in some sort of a grading package. That's why we bag and board comic books, right? We bag and board comic books because we're afraid of them falling apart, because they're not meant to be something that you have for a long time. So you have to take actual steps to preserve them. Like looking at this stuff, like you're talking about a Switch game, right? Which, I don't think anybody's grading Switch games yet, but it's going to happen, right? But the picture that's up is these are Switch games. Switch games come in a nice hard case, and they're small cartridges. Okay, so the preservation of that game is pretty much already taken care of. They come in a good case, and the media itself is not prone. It's not like a floppy disk that you put it out in the sun 5 minutes and it melts. Okay. It's a pretty solid media as it is, and you can probably enjoy it for a very, very long time as long as you just take care of it, right? So when you slap it into some other clear box, right? Because I guess you just want to look at the case, and of course you never opened it, because to get that 10 or whatever, you're going to have it sealed, factory sealed. The appeal starts to. At that point, I think you're losing it. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, where is the real joy of that? It just becomes another speculative, thing that people are trying to make a quick buck on.
I agree. But like I said, and it's interesting that you bring that up, talking about the condition. I have up on the shelf over here, I've got the second appearance of Moon Knight in Werewolf by Night, and it is graded and encapsulated. And part of the reason for that, number one, is I'm a big Moon Knight fan. I've talked about that. And then secondly, the reason for it too, in all honesty, is it came back a 3.0. It's not a super high quality book, but actually having encapsulated and graded is kind of helping to protect it a little bit, because the book is in relatively poor condition. So it's not like I'm going to be cracking that open and reading it again anyway. So it is a way to kind of, preserve it to an extent. And also because it's graded, it actually is going to help it basically retain more value potentially than if it was just loose. If it was just loose, someone probably wouldn't give me, probably more than $10 for it. But because it's graded, it's the 3.0, it's a second appearance of Moon Knight. If the show comes out, the Disney Plus show's good, it does really well, I've actually kind of protected my investment a little bit to an extent. Yeah. In theory, as you say, Eric, in theory.
and the preservation aspect isn't something to dismiss. I was just looking at some of my 80s G.I. Joe comics the other day, and I really literally felt like they were going to fall apart. And they've been sitting in a box in bags, not boarded, but bags for years. And I hadn't touched them for years. I mean, there was dust on the box. And literally, I was afraid like these books were going to basically disintegrate in my hand. So there is the preservation aspect of that as well. But that's not the case with a lot of these video games. It just isn't. A lot of the Nintendo stuff, they were in boxes. So and those boxes will deteriorate over time. That's definitely a concern. I do get that to some extent, but I don't know. It just doesn't seem like you're. It seems like you're very much losing what a video game intrinsically is by never opening it and putting it in a plastic case. It's just kind of a weird thing. I did want to acknowledge that Mike Lombard is in the house. He said, "Hey guys," so hey Mike, we appreciate you checking out the show. And then we had a comment from David regarding graded action figures. And he said, graded action figures is also another one you can still enjoy. And it's funny you say that, David, because there's a lot of people that would argue with you. Me personally, I generally like to keep stuff that I buy, especially now, I keep it in the package. Pretty much the stuff that I bought as an adult collector, you know, outside of my childhood, because I do have toys from my childhood that are loose. Most of my stuff I keep in the package, but I had a roommate that used to actually like basically tell me that I was committing sacrilege because I wouldn't open my toys and display them as they should be. So it's kind of funny because there are people that disagree there as well. You know, they say, hey, free the toy. You know what I mean? You don't want him to be like Stinky Pete from Toy Story, do you? You know what I mean? You've got to free him. So, but David, I totally get where you're coming from, because typically I do actually stuff I get now and stuff I've gotten as an adult, I keep it in the package. So in that case, grading them wouldn't necessarily really do anything to lose the enjoyment that I'm getting out of it, because I rarely take them out of the package anyway.
Yeah, and I was going to say, for me, I like to keep them in the packaging too, because I feel like it's part of the presentation. You know, I used to describe my action figure collection as sort of like a in my mind anyway, a derivative adjunct, if you will, to pop art. You know, it's mass produced, like what Warhol was doing with his prints to an extent. You know, you've got the cool comic image, you've got the physical representation of it in the action figure itself. And I have a few action figures I have specifically kept just because I love the presentation so much. Actually, I have the original Toy Biz first Captain America still in the packaging. That would be one I think would be kind of fun to get graded. And then the second one I have, actually I mentioned Fresh Monkey Fiction earlier. Fresh Monkey Fiction actually does the Amazing Heroes action figure line. They do a lot of the Golden Age characters. One of my favorite action figures actually in my collection is my Black Terror that I actually got actually from one of the very first Kickstarter fundraising campaigns that they actually did for those. And I've always been meaning to go over and actually buy more of those. And it just seems like whenever they have done another Kickstarter or whatever, like I'm strapped for cash when they do it, and I haven't been able to pick up any of those. But they've made some really cool figures over there. You know, they did not only, like I said, the Black Terror. I love the Black Terror. I just think he's kind of a cool character. But they also did, you know, the Golden Age version of Blue Beetle. They've done Nexus. They've done Mike Allred's Madman, as well as, you know, these really cool Golden Age characters like Stardust, the Super Wizard, and even the Golden Age version of the Streak. It's just really kind of cool what they've been doing with those action figures. I think it's really kind of neat. And those would be ones I think would be neat to be graded and preserve, again, because for me, I'm not going to take those out and play with them. You know, they're just going to stay in the packaging anyway. So why not, right?
I think you should be more like the guy in that that SNL skit where they did the thing with the adult collectors versus the kids when the Force Awakens figures came out. The one guy's all like, "I've got one in the package, I've got one loose, and then one just because." And then the kid's sitting there like, "Why?"
Well, the SNL bit that traumatized me, Eric, it was actually the New Balance bit. Like the middle-aged men wear the New Balance sneakers. That's the SNL bit that I've never really gotten.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that one. Sorry.
Yeah, I hated that.
I'm talking about the skit where they were making fun of adult collectors when
I know
Force Awakens stuff came out.
Yeah.
I was like, dude, this is hitting too close to home. This is starting to hurt, man. This is really starting to hurt.
No,
all right. So Ronnie had another comment. He says, "I'll never forget selling a $300 NES game called Gunnack. You shoot space carrots. It was loose. There are a lot of complete in box collectors that don't touch the game. They just play the emulators instead." And that's actually an interesting point, Ronnie, that a lot of people, a lot of game people, as far, you know, these days, they don't care about physical anymore. A lot of gamers don't even care about physical. I do. I like to have an actual physical copy of the game, personally. I don't really like doing digital downloads. and I don't use emulators very much. I tried to kind of get into it, but I feel it's like a little bit sketchy. I get worried about, you know, malware and things like that. And I was like, you know, plus I'm not into pirating stuff in general. I'm just not into that, you know, because I want to create stuff and I want people to pay me for it. So, but I do understand, especially even legitimately, a lot of people, they prefer digital gaming over physical anyway. So they don't even really care about the physical stuff.
That's interesting. And I was thinking about some of the stuff that I have in my collection, action figures and stuff that I'm preserving because I think they're cool. But like, I don't even know if they could even grade them anyway. Like, I've got a Captain Action Flash Gordon. Like, can they even grade that? Because that thing's gigantic in the box. It's huge.
Maybe David Motz has some more experience with grading action figures. I've never even looked into that, to be honest with you, about grading action figures. I know there are places you can do it. But it doesn't seem like graded action figures have taken off anywhere near like comics, you know, or trading cards for that matter, you know. Although it looks like gaming has definitely taken off, and I think quite possibly in a very bad way. So we'll see what the future holds, and we'll see if any indictments or lawsuits happen in the future, and we'll cover them here on the Retro Rogues Live.
Well, that all sounds very interesting to me. It'd be definitely a different angle anyway, if that kind of crazy shenanigans does happen.
You never know, Dave. You really don't. And when you see these prices, I definitely, my spidey sense definitely starts to tingle that something is not quite right here. There's something going on, you know. So market manipulation is a real thing. You never forget that as a collector. Market manipulation is a real thing. It does happen. It happens in some fairly innocent ways, and it happens in some straight up rip off. You are a thief. You need to go to jail ways. So we'll see what category this all falls into in the future. Time will tell. Time will tell.